Thank you everyone for joining this. I'm sure it will be a riveting and really exciting session. So hello and welcome to the Sustainable Procurement Pledge Human Rights Chapter webinar. My name is Victoria Folbeck, and together with my co-chair, Louise Herring, whose picture is here, we are welcoming and hosting Bertrand Meltaverne, who is the senior analyst at Spend Matters and the expert on procurement risk management systems, to give us an overview of how to leverage human rights tech to navigate this highly complex regulatory landscape for us in procurement and supply chain. Now, there are a couple of things that I wanted to say before I hand over to Bertrand. A couple of things. So one of them is that this session will be recorded, so you'll have the pleasure to share it and point your colleagues or anybody else to it, and so will we. We encourage that you put questions in the chat. We're hoping that it will be an interactive session. We kept some time for questions at the end of this webinar, and Louise is going to man it, so she will read the questions out. You are on mute at the moment, and also we will share a link to either a QR code or a link, isn't it, Charlotte, to please join, if you haven't already, the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, and join the pledge itself. That will show your desire to be part of our community and actually, wave the flag of sustainability and procurement. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my slides, and why don't we hand over to you, Bertrand. Bertrand, can you hear me?
Yeah, I do. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining, and I'm going to switch to presenting my screen. Hopefully you see my screen. And going full screen. So yeah, hi everybody. So I'm Bertrand Meltaverne, a French guy. Sorry for both the first name and the last name that have been difficult to say. Analyst at Spend Matters. I will say a few words about Spend Matters, and today I'm really happy and to be here talking about something that's super important, human rights in general, but especially within procurement, and basically how technology can support. So to address the topic, I will do a short introduction regarding Spend Matters, and then we'll dive into the topic in terms of my personal relationship to the topic of human rights and procurement procurement with purpose. We will address the elephant in the room, regulations. I know you had a session on that, so that will be a light touch, because I think a lot of people who are here today also had another session on that that went pretty deep on those topics. To focus then on really what that means for procurement and how can technology support procurement addressing that important challenge. And then obviously, as Victoria said, we're going to have a Q&A session, so don't hesitate to put your question in the chat, and we will answer them, or I'll try to answer them at the end of the session. So as I said, so I'm from Spend Matters. So I don't know if some of you know Spend Matters or not, but Spend Matters is basically the only analyst firm that is specifically looking and only looking at the supply chain and procurement space from a technology standpoint. And our business is to bring really a market intel on the vendors and the providers, the solution, the business challenges. And we serve a community that touches practitioners, so people within the procurement function, but also consultants that help their customers, investors, and obviously also the solution providers in that complex landscape that is the technology landscape for procurement. And as I said earlier, we're the only one really dedicated solely to procurement and the supply chain function. So with that being said, we cover the whole shebang, but obviously human rights, supply chain are things we have covered in the past. Just to illustrate here, I've written, but my colleagues also have written some of the stuff around the need for proper due diligence with the supply chain due to the legal framework and also to many other things, and touching on how technology can support that, which is basically what we're going to see today. That was just an illustration that we have a lot of content that is available if you want to go further on those topics. So let's start and let's go into the topic of human rights, supply chain, and tech. And I will start with my personal relationship to the topic. Um, and I don't know if you remember, but and if you how old you are, but I'm old enough to remember that in '96, I got exposed to some news, not necessarily with the article I'm putting here, but something made the news uh, basically based on a Life article from '96. And the article was basically a story around human rights and basically child used in Asia to produce, let's say, footballs from a famous brand. And I would say I did not read that article itself, but I think that article was powerful enough and exposed that so that other news outlets talked about it. And that's how I started to be sensitive to, as a consumer, what I'm buying may be produced by kids somewhere, and is that something I want? And obviously, since '96, there have been many other stories. This is another example. Some people receiving notes when they buy something. In the package, they have the surprise of finding a note, and the note says, "Hello, I am whatever, and I'm a prisoner, or I'm forced to work in their inhuman conditions," that kind of stuff. So there are multiple stories that illustrate that. And what I have to say is that the two examples I mentioned come from Asia, but the scary and the sad thing is that it's not just happening in countries that are, or galaxies that are far away, right? There are multiple examples of stories making it to the main headlines, CNN or whatever, of human rights being not really addressed in the right way in supply chains. So we're talking about child labor or forced labor by companies in Europe or in the US, and with worker in Europe and the US. So it's not just a thing that's coming from Asia. And I mean, I'm going to use air quote here because the funny thing is that I prepared that slide quite a long time ago, over the summer, I believe. And since then, I was able to add two more pictures. So there are constantly new stories. And this is something that we have to have in mind. And this is basically the purpose and the why we're here today. So as I said, the personal side of things is that from that article and the many since then, I really took it personally as a consumer, because at the end of the day, it's those buying decisions, and first of all, as we're all consumers, that shape supply chains and supply and the world of tomorrow, right? So that means that as a consumer, as I said, I try, and I'm not always perfect, but I try as much as possible to pay attention to my buying decisions. And also as a parent, this is a picture of my son here. I try also to convey the same, message around, growing stuff locally, impact of what you buy, not buying strawberries. I live in Austria, so not buying strawberries in December, paying attention to where things are coming from, that kind of stuff. And I know I'm not the only one, right? And obviously people attending that webinar today are probably on the same page as I am. So that means that other people and even companies have taken the same road, right? But the thing is that those decisions are very isolated. It's people here, companies there. And I think we're reached a stage where that will not be enough, right? Because the problem is there, it's known, it's visible, but people don't want to look up, right? They want to ignore it, and they continue to ignore it. Either they count on the invisible hand to address that, or they put it on the side and say, yeah, it's there, but let's wait. Maybe something's going to happen in the future, technology, whatever, that's going to automatically fix that issue. And I think that at the end of the day, for a long time around human rights and labor in the supply chain, but is also valid for a lot of sustainability related topic. People were talking about the good things to do. Then they started to say it's the right thing to do. And I think at the end of the day, today it's the thing to do, period. There are no discussions. And what is interesting in that change, in that trend, from the good thing to do to the things to do, we've seen also another trend that I think is really speaking volume about that. And I'm talking about the transition from CSR to ESG, which are two similar but somehow different things. Like, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, CSR was the thing. And I don't think ESG was even a word back in the days. Everybody and every company was talking about CSR. Now nobody's talking about CSR and it's all about ESG. So that's interesting because when you go back to the meanings and the definition of those words, I think it illustrates something pretty interesting. So basically CSR, the most important aspect is that it's an proactive initiative. It's self-regulating, a company saying, I'm going to do that thing because it's the right thing to do or the good thing to do, right? Uh, and basically, we've seen a lot of business models, including CSR, that are basically aiming at improving society and the environment. But more recently and closer to today, ESG is the big thing. And the difference between CSR and ESG, or one of the difference, is that ESG is more or less externally regulated. And now I'm starting to talk about regulation. We'll go deeper on that. But the thing is that it's an external pressure to the organization to put them into the same mold and follow the same practice, create a level playing field across regions and countries, that kind of thing. And I think also ESG versus CSR is way more related to business valuation than CSR was. So that's interesting change and transition from CSR to ESG. As I said earlier, in the background, you have the whole regulatory landscape. And this is why we've seen that switch to some extent, because individual decisions will not be enough, and everybody needs to move toward the same direction. This is one of the aspects of regulations. And the only thing I can say is that the number of regulation has increased quite a lot in the last years. You have here just a couple of them, just to illustrate the fact that if you go back to 10, 20 years ago, there were only a couple, like the UK Modern Slavery Act or the French Corporate Duty of Vigilance Law and some others. And since then, and especially in the last year, you've seen a boom in regulation. And I'm just talking about the one here around labor, and there are many others touching like carbon management and some other aspects related to sustainability. So at the end of the day, those regulations are here to force a movement. But the next question is basically, and closer to our topic of today, what does that mean for procurement? Well, at first sight, we're talking about a headache, right? As I said, there is a constant flow of regulations touching human rights, carbon, and some other stuff. I would say that procurement professionals are not really lacking in activity. So they're all struggling with workload in terms of, the supply disruption, negotiations, that kind of stuff. So it's one more topic to address. And at the end of the day, it's one more topic to address that also implies efforts to collect more data, more information that we have to, first of all, collect, as I said, but also manage. And the thing is that all these regulations, or most of them, is not just information and data about my direct suppliers, but it's also about my whole supply chain, because the expectation of those regulations is that companies will basically perform due diligence across the board. So that's quite a change. And obviously, last but not least, sustainability and human rights are yet another dimension that procurement people have to take into consideration, or one trade-off, whenever they make decisions. So decision in terms of selecting or working with suppliers, in terms of qualifying a supplier, in terms of sourcing, etc., etc. So the first thing is that it makes things more complex, even if there is a good reason to do it. But are there any ways to make it, let's say, less painful or easier? So basically, yeah, and technology, I would say, can support organizations who are faced with those challenges and with that headache. Technology can play some kind of the role of the aspirant, if I can say that. We'll go deeper on those aspects, but at a high level, I think there are four key elements to have in mind in terms of the value or the ROI of tech in the context of human rights and supply chain. First of all, because all these solutions are digital, they bring efficiencies in terms of data collection, aggregating, consolidating data, sharing data. So the amount of effort that is related to that data collection I was talking about before, it's going to be reduced. They also boost effectiveness, so the ability to produce a result by being able to embed data information into various and every, let's say, step of any process or any decisions. So this is this aspect of orchestrating, making sure that a supplier qualification process, a sourcing decision, etc., is basically sustainability aware, so that at the end of the day, that decision improves the world of tomorrow, the legacy we're going to leave to our kids. The other element is that being digital, they allow a better knowledge management, knowledge sharing, so that people are faster on board, can share best practices, and not reinvent the wheel, sort of. And I think one key element is also the ability through digital solutions, to do things that were not possible before. So that's the innovation component, right? So now let's look at a bit more details about them. As I said earlier, efficiencies will be about simplifying and streamlining the data collection, because you will be able, through a digital solution, to connect with your stakeholders within your organization, but also your suppliers or your third parties, institutions, etc., so that any data can be pulled into your system and used. In terms of, let's say, risk management, solution never sleep, so they can always basically update data in real time. You may not need a manual activity or action to that, and they obviously provide, because they don't sleep and have these sensors capturing news and stuff here and there, or changes in regulation, they can provide the right, let's say, watchtower and notification system to organization. And obviously, being digital, one element that brings efficiencies, it's the network effect, where basically on the buyer side, on the supplier side, but also on that ecosystem, buyers and suppliers, sharing data and mutualizing actions can be very beneficial and speed up things, right? On the effectiveness side of things, that orchestration or cross-process fertilization I was talking about is all about breaking those goddamn silos, right? Making sure that a process executed within the procurement function is taking into account human rights and many other parameters and criteria and constraints, so that at the end of the day, the decision can be made with all cards in hands, right? So again, it's like scouting suppliers, qualifying suppliers, sourcing decision, that kind of things. And obviously, digital can also be some kind of more like co-pilot type of thing, where basically the users of that solution, buyers, suppliers, stakeholders, whoever they are, will get insights and guidance, so that they can take the right path in terms of identifying action and taking action. I also mentioned knowledge management. By making things digital, available online, obviously there is an easier access to the information. You cannot say, oh, I didn't know, or I could not find the information because it was in a drawer somewhere on paper. So you can make that information sharing much, much easier. That information is available to anyone who needs it, whenever and wherever. I think one important aspect is the ability also to improve knowledge management. So I mentioned the fact that it's all about, sharing those practices, and who does, maybe someone somewhere in the organization did something pretty good that's bringing good result, and some others, another country, another BU would like to benefit from that. So it's really helping that, moving from, let's say, a tribal knowledge to more shared knowledge, right? And obviously another aspect of having that knowledge in a digital solution is that it can be updated quite easily, instantly, and basically whoever is going to access that information is going to have the latest up-to-date version of it. So that being said, technology can play a key role, which I've tried to illustrate. But things are also complicated because there's pretty much a very fragmented landscape when you think about solutions that can help address the challenge of human rights in the supply chain. And the different solution types will support various use cases at different level. So you have the suites, S2C, S2P, so source to contract or source to pay contract, source to pay suites. You have solutions that are more related to managing suppliers. You have solutions that are more around risk and compliance. You have some that are more about supplier risk or third-party risk or supply chain risk. And then you have also specialists that do only address human rights within a supply chain. So all these solutions will address different use cases with a different level of depth. But at the end of the day, the key capabilities, whenever you are on searching for a solution or to define your needs, that list here can be a good checklist for that. because at the high level, the capabilities will be around managing the risk governance. The risk governance, it's about managing the risk and not ignoring it. It's all about identifying a risk in terms of analyzing a risk and sensing incidents or risks, something that happens somewhere. Obviously, sensing, detecting a risk is one thing, but then you need to assess that risk. So analyze what it could mean to your organization in terms of consequences and evaluate that. And obviously, address it in terms of mitigation. And obviously, afterwards, if you take any actions to mitigate a risk, continue to monitor it because things could change. And because you cannot really foresee and forecast everything, we've seen the last year that many things happen that we could not really anticipate that much. Managing incidents and disruptions is going to be another key capability. To be able to do that, there are a bunch of, let's say, supporting capabilities that are also important in terms of being able to create a data model so that you can have a risk register that is useful in terms of the breadth, the dimension that the risk solution is embracing, because we talked today about human rights, but there are many other dimensions that need to be taken into account. The depth, we talked about the pain and the challenge related to those regulations that force organization to look beyond the direct suppliers, so the tier one, but also the tier two, three, et cetera, up the supply chain. So that's something that's going to be important, that depth in terms of providing that transparency in the supply chain and being able to map all these networks. And obviously, the granularity is another aspect of the risk model, the ability to be very detailed in terms of supply location, maybe also in terms of what you are buying, and potentially, as we're talking about human rights, being able to assess worker, employee level things. Another capability related to some of the benefit of digital solution I mentioned before, it's the ability for a solution to deliver and make available best practices and deliver guidance. So that could be within the application or on top as a service, but that's a key component. Obviously, you're gonna have to analyze and do some simulation and that kind of stuff. So everything that is related to analytics and AI will be important, and reporting too, since regulation more often than not include reporting requirements. And other key capabilities, the ability for that solution to talk and share in and out information with other systems, right? Because you don't want to have silos, as I said earlier, so that orchestration between systems is a key component. And obviously, orchestration is not just about system, but it's also about people. So the component around collaboration between procurement and other functions, but also between the buying company and suppliers is going to be quite important too. And then obviously, since we're talking about human rights, you may have also the need for specific capabilities that are more, let's say, related to human rights in terms of content. That could be templates to audit suppliers, or scorecards that are built based on the requirements of specific regulation, that kind of thing. The ability also to cover auditing, because auditing, going on site to suppliers, is also a way to have a look at how people are working, who is working there. The ability to support whistleblowers, because it's also a great source of information, and the ability to monitor things like training, education, wages, and many other things at the worker level. So, as I said, the various solutions support various use cases at different levels. At Spend Matters, we go deep in risk management and many other things. And we conduct, let's say, surveys, and we analyze and we see solutions. And basically what I'm sharing here is the result of that analysis, considering, let's say, suites, so S2C, source to contract, or source to pay suites, or supplier management solution, SXM, or SCRM, supply chain risk management solution, or TPRM, third-party risk management solution. And as you see here, looking at the different dimensions I mentioned before, risk data modeling, risk governance, et cetera, the level of support of each category will vary. I'm not here to comment every cell and the color of every cell, but the slide was just to illustrate the fact that depending on your requirements, what is important to you, what you're looking for, one category or the other would be a best fit in terms of addressing the capabilities I mentioned before. And another consideration to have in mind is that how does that fit? How that technology, that piece of software is going to fit with basically the S2P process, so the procurement activities. Because at the end of the day, you have solution to execute processes, sourcing, contracting, ordering, invoicing, et cetera, Could be one, could be multiple, whatever. What you want to achieve at the end of the day is that your S2P process, those key decisions that are made at every stage and every step, is, as I mentioned before, risk aware. So risk aware, and under risk, I mean the many component of risk, but obviously human rights, right? And this is also here that different solution will allow you to build a landscape that could be very different, right? Starting on the right side, let's say that suites are supposedly addressing the whole S2P process and also include risk capabilities. So you could think that if you have a suite, then why not use it for human rights too? Looking at more specialists, so supply chain risk management specialists, third-party risk management specialists, and human rights specialists, they're gonna participate to providing you with that risk awareness. But the challenge is gonna be to be able to connect that awareness to the actual operational and tactical execution, right? To make those processes risk aware. So obviously, this is where you're going to have a certain number of functional trade-offs. Is my suite, which I'm using for my S2P, good enough versus the requirement I have for human rights? The answer could be yes, could be no. That's going to depend on the depth and different things. Should I complement it with a best of breed solution or more something because I'm trying to address human rights and carbon and broader operational risk, or should I go for more an CRM provider? These are the type of consideration you have to have in mind when selecting and looking for a solution, right? I also mentioned one element that digital or digital tech is bringing that is the challenge or the pain or the headache for companies who want to address human rights in their supply chain was innovation. And so far, I've not talked about it, but I wanted to touch a bit on that now. So innovation is really about tech allowing people and organizations to do things previously impossible. And one element that is important here that I wanted to mention, especially in the context of human rights in the supply chain, it's the ability for technology and some solutions to allow organizations to map and reveal their supply chain. Let's say the traditional and maybe the usual way to identify suppliers, it's basically buyers are asking their direct suppliers, who are your suppliers? So declarations. So that approach, this cascading of surveys, has pros and cons. One pro, for example, is that it's going to be pretty accurate because your tier one supplier, your direct supplier will declare to you the suppliers you're using to deliver or manufacture the goods you buy from it. But one key disadvantage of that approach is that if you consider tier 2, 3, 4, so I'm talking about the suppliers of the suppliers of the suppliers of the supplier, then you cannot really reach those guys because first of all, you don't know them. And if you send them surveys to ask them who they work with, they will probably don't know you because you're not a customer. So this is where technology can bring innovations. There are different several providers that center their value prop and value proposition on leveraging technology. I'm talking about data feeds, AI, and that kind of stuff to be able to really reveal a company's supply chain. So at the end of the day, what you do, if you work with such a company, you give them the list of your direct suppliers. They're gonna process it, and basically they're gonna be able immediately or after a while, depending on the solution and the offering, to show you a map of your tier 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 suppliers. Some offerings are very granular because they can even tell you who is buying what from who. And they can also provide risk scoring regarding human rights and operational risk and some others for every node of that supply chain. So there are two ways to achieve that. I mean, obviously one method to do that is to leverage some kind of community and network, as you know, or marketplace, let's say. Some providers operate also a network where basically companies connect to find new customers, exchange POs, orders, do sourcing event, that kind of stuff. So they have quite an extensive, sorry, database of companies, and they also understand the relationship between the companies. For example, if you have a network where companies exchange purchase orders and invoices, then it's easy for you to understand who is a supplier of who or who is a customer of whom. So there are a couple of benefits and challenges around that. I mean, one of the key benefits is that it's pretty low effort because it's basically based on the community and the network effect for that. And any changes in those relationships will be automatically reflected on your map of your supply chain. The challenge is sometimes the accuracy because the validity of relationship may be different based on for each company. When it's good to know that a company company A is buying something from company, what did I say? Company A is buying something from company B, but is that thing finding that its way to you? That's what I mean here. The other methodology is around really discovery, not from a community or network, but really from data. So that could be data that is publicly available or purchase data. And when I'm talking about data, more specifically, we're talking about trade data, freight data, custom data, that kind of stuff. So everything is, we have so much there's such an amount of data available out there that some providers are taking the road of using data to be able to reveal any supply chain. And I'm using air quote on any. So obviously it's also very low effort because again, there is no consideration of depending on data collection or on your side at least. It's an immediate revelation of your supply chain. And there is no dependencies on the constraint of a network, and the information is more or less up to date. Challenges, it's obviously you have to have data. Some countries like China are not super eager to share, for example, custom data, that kind of stuff. So that could be also depending on industries or verticals. That could be challenging to find the right data sources to use or to buy. And obviously the challenge that we're talking about commercial and huge amount of data. So you have to have the capability and the capacity to process it and analyze it. And at the end of the day, I think those capabilities, so the ability to provide almost instantly the visibility of who are your suppliers hiding in your supply chain, is quite something important. And that was not really super doable before, but that progress in terms of digitalization of business exchanges, AI, and data processing and computing, that is today available. And that is core to the challenge of understanding the potential risk related to human rights in the supply chain, but many others. I mean, you think about carbon or even operational risk. This is somehow the cornerstone of many, many other topics. So I said that we have a fragmented landscape with many flavors of solutions, and within each bubble you see here, suites, GRC solution, etc. There are many providers hidden behind, right? So this fragmented landscape and this fragmented offering is something that is tricky to understand. That's critical, but at the end of the day, that's complex. And this is where, for example, we at Spend Matters are specialists of that, and we provide tools for organization who are looking for a solution so that they can, through a series of questions, find, based on their requirement, basically, try to identify the most suitable shortlist. That's for one thing. And obviously, to kind of wrap up all of that, is that on Spend Matters, and if you wanted to know more or explore further on human rights in the supply chain or some other sustainability aspects within the supply chain, you can go to spendmatters.com. We have quite a lot of articles on that, and you can even become a free member to access more. We have also built some kind of guide that describes risk management solutions. So it's not specific to human rights, but it's addressing the different flavors of risk. But I think it can be a good start for your journey around understanding the complex landscape. And you even have, using that URL, access to a free tool or a free access level to a tool we have that allows you to look at different solutions. So I took the one around risk management like TPRM and SCRM of different solutions from all these bubbles I mentioned before, suites, supplier management solution, and how they fit with macro use cases, third-party risk management and supply chain risk management. And obviously, subscribing and becoming a member would unlock another level of granularity and details about the various offerings that are available on the market. And with that, I think we can start our Q&A session. So hopefully we have questions. We'll see if we get answers. That's up to me, but
Bertrand, that's awesome. Thank you so much. It's certainly a really complex subject. There was quite an active chat as well that I will let you look through a little bit later, but we do indeed have questions. Before we go over to the questions that I'll let Louise lead from the chat, there are some questions that certainly you and I have discussed before. There is such a proliferation of point solutions. And as a buyer, you know, one of the big worries that one has is, do I buy and then that solution is going to be bought, or it's used for my, you know, or it's used for my specific use case, but then the use cases constantly evolve and all of a sudden the solution cannot provide the need for the use case. Like, how is the provider landscape in your view evolving and is going to evolve? And what are you've given us a very good kind of heat map and idea of what to select and like a decision criteria for selection. But what would be your, in light of that immature market, what would be your like top 3 pieces of advice for selection criteria to give to people who are searching for these solutions? So I guess 2 questions in one, right? So over to you.
So the first, because I would probably forget the second one later, so you would have to remind me, you know. Like a goldfish, you know, 7 seconds or 5 seconds of memory. Yeah, so I mean, I'm gonna talk more generally on human rights, but also like carbon, all these new topics, and especially related to regulations. I mean, now we have deforestation coming in the EU, etc. They drive needs, right? Because again, going back to my presentation years ago, it was up to each company to decide or not whether they're gonna do something around human rights or no, I don't care. I won't look up. I'm gonna ignore that kind of stuff. But now those regulations are creating a need actually. And obviously, a lot of providers are answering that need and seeing that need rise and want to answer and get new customers or cement customers. So you have two trends. You have existing providers, supplier management, risk, suites that are extending the capability of the solution in-house or with partners. And then you have an explosion of new companies that, you know, startups basically. And this is probably what your question is about. And that's clear that, you know, like any bubble, at some point, it could burst. I would say that obviously as a procurement and working procurement, IT, cross-functional, et cetera, but due diligence around, you know, qualifying and selecting suppliers, that's also valid for that type of suppliers or providers or vendors, right? Because, you know, some of them look very attractive on paper, but if you go beyond like asking things like how many customers do you have? Can we have a look at the solution? Can we have a demo? Can we do a proof of concept? That kind of stuff. And then you start to see that the box is pretty much empty, right? That's one thing. Second, I would say it's also about being clear around your requirements, so that you can really cross-check and see how that fits, right? For example, for human rights and carbon, there are a lot of solutions on the market that are here and that are providing value to certain organizations. But if you consider the long run, that may not be that satisfactory. So I will try to be more precise, but The risk governance I mentioned before, it's kind of a journey, because at the end of the day, what you want to do is improve, do stuff that are going to improve. That, you know, modern slavery does not exist, or at least you're not buying from companies that do use children or whatever, or forced labor. And some companies, what they want to do, maybe because sometimes regulations are not super clear, or they want just to assess the compliance, like how bad am I, or how good I am. So a lot of offerings are about providing you with a visibility on your exposure to modern slavery. But they stop here. So it's good to know, but then the next step is, how do I improve? And the same thing is for carbon. It's good to know my carbon footprint, but the ultimate goal is not to know your carbon footprint, is to reduce it, right? So this whole governance I was mentioning before, seeing is one thing, but then some solution will stop here, but you have to think about the journey you're gonna, because this is step one of multiple steps, and those steps will include, what should I do? So some kind of ability to do give guidance and recommendation on potential actions to address the topic, and then to execute on those actions. So that's, for example, something I was referring to when talking about your requirements on the long run. So that's I would say some of the things I would say to have in mind to pre-filter, shortlist providers, and maximizing the chances to select one that will survive, and also that we're gonna be able to use for the whole journey. And
Yeah,
you see,
I
I
love
forgot
what you're
question number
saying.
2.
No, but I think this is actually dovetails into the question number 2, which is, what are the key criteria, selection criteria? Because as you rightly said, it's not only about visibility, it's also an ability to action some of these insights that you have garnered and actually make, ultimately fix or help to fix the problem. So that's really insightful and helpful. I'm going to hand over to Louise now. Louise, where are you? I can't see you,
Hello.
but I know you're there. Hey,
I'm here.
Do you
Hello.
want to, hi, do you want to ask the questions that we had from, the audience? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So just for those of you that are online, if you do want to ask a question, if you can pop it in the chat, it's slightly easier, so we don't have to monitor 2 things, but equally happy for you to use the Q&A, that's fine. So Bertrand, thank you very much. We've got a question from Fanny. What do you think about the digital product passport? Could this address human rights and sustainability challenges by improving transparency, traceability, and accountability in the supply chain?
Yes, I could talk hours about digital passport, because I think it's one way to make things visible around human rights, but also many other things around understanding where things are coming from and what does that mean in terms of impacts. So it could be human rights, could be CO2, etc., etc. And this digital passport, it's a way to it's not addressing, I mean, it can address traceability, but the purpose we're talking about is not this one here, but it's also conveying that information at each step of the supply chain and making it available to the end customer, so the end buyer, right? So that with a QR code, if you think about battery passport, or you have also that for food, like wine or fish or whatever, you have a QR code as a consumer, and I can have the information around where was it produced, what about the CO2 footprint, what about the workers, etc., etc. So I think it's super important, and I think organizations have yet understood what digital passport mean, and that it's probably something, the next wave of regulations will be around that. So the first, let's say, Q1 was on batteries, because batteries with EVs, etc. There are more and more rising consumption of batteries, and we all know where potentially where the raw materials come from, right? And how touchy and tricky that is. But I think that concept is going to be expanded and should be expanded.
Great, thank you. I had another question. Well, the question was mine. Sorry, selfishly. It was just about the, your kind of final slide when you were talking about supply chain transparency. 100% agree. It's really critical to bringing due diligence to scale. And we really need, as you've really clearly outlined, we really need technology to make this work. But time and time again in different spheres, I think what we find is the challenges around getting human beings to overcome their fears about technology and transparency. So wondered if you could share any insights, any suggestions about in these conversations, how have you helped or how would you suggest that you can help companies overcome their fears about sharing data about supply chains? I think your last slide kind of referenced, the ability to, maybe make the data anonymous, because what we really want to know is where sites are rather than company names. So that was a really great suggestion. But there is this kind of recurring fear that data is going to be stolen, supply chains are going to be stolen, relationships are going to be stolen. And I guess, be really keen to know, how do we, there's an inevitability we need to do this. How do we overcome that fear and kind of fast track it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what you said is right. For example, like if you consider some regulation about, I'll take the UFLPA, the US regulation, because that's the first one I have in mind, is specific about a region in China. So actually, if you go down a road and you will be too compliant, you don't necessarily need to know a company name, but you need to know, in my supply chain, is there a company, I don't care about the name, within that region. So sometimes that level of information is enough, and it allows, it removes that fear of I'm gonna share trade secrets and that kind of stuff. I think there are also mechanism in those that provider bring in terms of that sharing information, of it's like opt-in, opt-out on the supplier side of things, so that a certain level of information, it may be public or public to a certain network, and then to go deeper, then the supplier needs to agree to, right? So this is another mechanism that is available. But obviously, a certain number of elements I mentioned is data that is anyway available out there, trade data, custom, et cetera. So actually, this is where you don't need any declaration from someone. And this is also a way to get the information without, it's not addressing the risk because you're accessing the data, but the information is out there. So it's going to depend on which methodology, which approach you have, and it's not a one or the other. It could be sometimes mixed, right? And I think at the end of the day, whenever it's more collaborative, it's also about explaining to the companies why you're doing that, and that it's basically regulation. We don't have any choice, and if we don't do that, we're going to lose market shares. So you're going to lose a customer. So it's a mix of different approaches to motivate, but also explain, and sometimes basically bypass that concern.
Great, thank you. So another question that's more of technology and behaviour. A question about, is it easy to get global involvement in sustainable procurement respecting human rights? Because the priorities are so different from one state to another. So I guess most companies are looking for a single technology solution, or one or two technology solutions, but how do you overcome the kind of priorities, the differences, the interests between states and regions, etc.?
That's true, because one key driver around sustainability is regulation. There is the whole consumer demand, etc. But a lot of people don't even want to look up. So, and the invisible hand of the market has also its limits. So this is why we've seen a rise in terms of the regulations, and they vary from one country to the other. But usually the regulation try to create a level playing field. If you think about a lot of regulation from the EU, it's like it's not, because it's not related, and it's not only for companies based or even operating in the EU. It's about the market access. So that means that at the end of the day, even if you're a US company and you don't believe in that, or et cetera, but a huge chunk of your revenue is coming from Europe, then you have to comply. So at the end of the day, I think the regulation tend to create that level playing field, because they also don't want to penalize local industries. They want to put everybody on the same level. So I think despite the various level of how can I say that, awareness and willingness to address sustainability with all it encompasses, and there are huge differences between Europe and the US. We'll see what comes next year. But I think at the end of the day, the issue is global, I mean, at least for global companies. So at the end of the day, addressing that topic is not related so much about the countries, and solutions regarding those aspects are meant to cover global needs.
Great, thank you, Bertrand. So we've got a question from Jessica. What level of maturity, she said, building blocks, characteristics do you see that a company needs to have in place to successfully implement and integrate the kind of solutions we've been talking about today?
All right. I would say, like, I talked about a lot of stuff that may be nice to have for many, but I would say a clear understanding of who your suppliers are, and what they are, and what you buy from them. It's a good start. Because it starts. So having that visibility is, for me, the good start, the step one. So if you're not there yet, then anything beyond that is going to be super tricky. So I would say, like, going back to who are my suppliers, what do I buy from them, the spend, their locations, and I'm not talking about the location of the headquarters, but talking about manufacturing, so that could be a bit more complex. So these would be the fundamentals, if I can say that. And then if you're not there, then you have to move to understanding that, because it's a prerequisite to everything else that comes after.
And would you say that most of the companies that you're working with, when they start this journey of wanting to find a technology solution, that they're very clear about what they're going to use the data for and how they're going to use it and how they're going to integrate it into business decisions? I mean, is that the sort of starting point? I'm coming, I suppose, more from the experience of human rights data platforms, where very often data is collected, but then it's not used, it's not integrated into kind of business decisions, it just sits in a report. And just curious whether you see that as something that really needs to have been thought about to make this work successfully.
Wow, because I mean, it's diverse. You have organizations that are pretty mature and already have answered all the questions you mentioned with, and some are less, and they just say, oh, there is a new regulation, I want to comply, and that's it. So this is where understanding where you are, like we mentioned before, and your requirements is going to be key to selecting the right provider. Because again, if you're super mature, you have already mapped your supply chain, et cetera, you have already a clear idea on how you're going to use that data and where you need it and how you need it, then the type of solution you're going to be looking for is going to be different from one that needs to guide you, educate you, and move you from step 1 to step 2 and step 3, right? So this is where, I mean, there is no one answer here, and there's no one size fits all. This is where each organization needs to take a step back and analyze what they are, what they have, and how mature they are, and also understand that. And it goes back to what I said earlier around some solution being a bit shallow, that the challenge is not to be compliant, although could be a strict deadline milestone to be compliant by, but the idea is to also be able to take action and improve.
Great, thank you. And a question building on my one, Bertrand, which is from Adrienne. Are there any niche solutions or startup providers you could call out in this field that specialize in human rights data and action planning? So they're trying to bring those two things together.
I'm on mute. I mean, I usually don't want to mention companies because I don't want to endorse a company or make people think I'm endorsing one. But like, I would take, like, I mean, I'm going to mention two of them because one of them is also related to something we talked about before, these digital passport. Like Circular is a company that's pretty interesting because they do a lot of stuff around those digital passport, and especially for batteries. And because they do that, and if you address CO2, you address human rights, because again, doing that means that you're going to have your supply chain visible, you can track information, you can understand who does what where, who buys what from whom. So it's super interesting. Again, because I think digital passport are something that many companies have not yet understood, but that's going to impact them a lot. And more like a best of breed specialist, I mean, I remember seeing like Freedom, FRDM. So it's called, I mean, the name of the company is FRDM, but you say Freedom. That's pretty interesting, specialized on human rights. That is also interesting, but there are many others, and I'm not making any recommendation or endorsement.
Very much fair enough. Victoria, do you want to ask your question? It's your question rather than me gargling it and getting it wrong.
Oh, no, thank you, Louise. And thanks, Bertrand, again, and everybody. I think it is nearly coming up to the hour. So if I may squeeze the last question in, it is about changing the lens and looking from the perspective of the service providers, because you, Bertrand, are in a unique position where you talk to procurement, who are the buyers, but also to the solution providers. And what would you say the solution providers struggle with the most when they engage with procurement for the selection of their solutions, and how can procurement help themselves? So what would be the kind of collective feedback from these human rights tech service providers to us in procurement to really help ourselves?
I would say, and it's going to be, I mean, my answer also applies to many other areas and beyond human rights, but a clear idea of the requirements. What are you trying to achieve and what do you need, right? And I understand that, especially around sustainability and regulation, a lot of those regulations are new. They are not, more often than not super clear. They don't really, most of the time, define what good looks like. And then basically you have to do your internal work as an organization to say, okay, what does that regulation means to me? What do I want to achieve? What do I want to do? How do I translate that into requirements? More than coming to a provider and say, yeah, make me compliant to the Modern Slavery Act in the UK or whatever. So that's having a good and solid case will make the life of the provider easier, but also at the end of the day, serve procurement in terms of the ultimate goal, selecting the right provider, but also the adoption and the usage of that solution.
Thank you very much for that. I agree. I mean, you need to, even though human rights as a subject is highly complex, you do need to know what you're buying, because you are actually implementing tech and integrating it into your wider solution base. So you should have a solid use case and understanding of what you want to achieve. So that's certainly very, very helpful. I think we are already onto the hour, aren't we, Louise? So thank you, Louise, for the questions. Thank you, Charlotte, for opening it. Bertrand, this was very insightful, really good methodology that you shared. We love the free resources that you've also shared with us. And I'm sure this is going to be a conversation that we're going to have on an ongoing basis. I want to thank everybody who participated and who asked questions, who gave comments. Please also link in with us, because there's a lot happening in the human rights chapter. We have another session, open microphones, work planning session on the 5th of December happening, where we are planning for what we should deliver for next year. So I hope that we can see you there, and we'll send you the link to that as well. So thank you again for your time, Bertrand. Thank you to you, and hopefully we see you guys soon on another webinar.
You're welcome. Thank you to you for inviting me to this. Have a good day.
Thanks very much. Thank you.